The camera lingers on a small figure seated in the corner of a dimly lit room. Round them, the murmur of adult voices, some urgent, some dismissive, fills the space. Papers shuffle, phones ring, doors slam, and yet the child remains still, absorbing it all in silence. Their eyes, too old for their face, scan the room with quiet vigilance, a subtle tension threading through every movement. Here is a child, one of millions, who has been thrust into a world they are not equipped to navigate. A voice, soft yet edged with quiet intensity, begins to speak. What happens when a child is forced to grow up too soon? When innocence is stripped away before it even has a chance to bloom? The question hangs in the air, heavy, unanswerable, yet deeply familiar. Across war-torn landscapes, in crowded urban apartments, in houses where neglect or ambition overshadow care, children bear burdens that belong to adults. They negotiate, they strategize, they endure, they hide. Statistics flash briefly on screen. Millions of children living in conflict zones, millions more facing abuse or extreme poverty. But the numbers, stark as they are, fail to capture the quiet fracture of the human spirit that occurs behind closed doors. In whispered fears, and in the lonely ache of a child's mind that has been asked to shoulder more than it should. Childhood is meant to be a sanctuary, a period of growth and wonder. Yet for some, that sanctuary is stolen, replaced by responsibility, fear, or the heavy weight of expectation. In one small apartment, a girl prepares dinner while her mother fights another unseen battle. In another home, a boy folds his father's laundry, careful not to disturb the simmering tension that fills the house. Each act, mundane in appearance, is a survival strategy, a silent assertion of control in a world that has demanded they be adults long before they were ready. A child's mind, the narrator continues, does not simply adapt when thrust into adult roles, it fractures. Invisible scars form, shaping who they are and who they may become. The camera shifts to a slow montage, a playground empty at dusk, an abandoned toy in a sunbeam, a notebook filled with tiny, precise handwriting. Symbols of a childhood that might have been quietly whispering of dreams deferred and innocence lost. The opening scene sets the emotional tone for the documentary, intimate, haunting, and reflective. It is a bridge between the personal and the universal, an invitation to witness, to feel, and to understand. As viewers, we are asked not only to observe but to remember our own beginnings, and to consider the children whose beginnings were cut short. This is not just a story of loss. It is a story of resilience, of survival, and of the quiet ways in which children endure the world before they even have a chance to know it. In the quiet hours of the evening, when most children are meant to be tucked into bed, a different story unfolds in some homes. A child is preparing dinner, mediating a fight between parents, or soothing a crying sibling, all while swallowing their own exhaustion and longing for care. This child is not merely helping out, they have stepped into the role of caretaker, a role that should belong to adults. In psychological terms, this is known as parentification, a phenomenon where children are forced to assume responsibilities far beyond their years. The concept of parentification has been studied extensively by psychologists such as Ivan Boschor-Maninian and Salvador Miniachin. Boschor-Maninian, in his pioneering work on family ethics, emphasized the hidden emotional debts children carry when they assume adult roles. Maninian, a structural family therapist, explored how family dynamics can place children in impossible positions, acting as emotional buffers or surrogate spouses. These children often internalize the belief that their needs are secondary to others. Learning early that their worth is measured by their ability to care for, soothe, and stabilize those around them. Consider the story of Anna, a teenager in a household marked by addiction and conflict. By age 12, she was responsible for cooking meals, waking her younger siblings for school, and calming her mother during late-night panic attacks. Anna's diary, filled with meticulous notes and schedules, reads almost like a professional planner. Every hour accounted for, every crisis managed. Her own desires, friendships, hobbies, even sleep were carefully rationed, often sacrificed entirely. Anna's experience illustrates a pattern seen in countless homes across cultures. The parentified child becomes a silent architect of family survival, their own childhood deferred indefinitely. The emotional costs of parentification are profound and enduring. Research shows that these children are prone to heightened anxiety, chronic hyperindependence, and difficulty trusting others. Their sense of self becomes intertwined with responsibility. If I am not doing enough, everything will fall apart. In adulthood, this internalized pressure often manifests as perfectionism, difficulty delegating, or choosing partners who continue the cycle of emotional caretaking. Even moments of intimacy or vulnerability can trigger discomfort, as the parentified child is conditioned to prioritize others' needs over their own. Literature offers vivid illustrations of this archetype. In To Kill a Mockingbird, Scal Finch witnesses the adult burdens of her father navigating a morally complex world, while also contending with her own maturation amid societal expectations. Similarly, in The Glass Castle by Jeanette Walls, the author recounts a childhood spent managing chaos, shielding siblings, and suppressing personal fear. These narratives mirror real-life patterns. The parentified child is rarely the focus of pity, yet their resilience masks deep emotional strain. Parentification is not merely an individual tragedy, it is systemic. Across cultures and socioeconomic strata, children are tasked with responsibilities they are unequipped to handle. In some households, older siblings act as parental figures to younger ones, while parents work multiple jobs or struggle with addiction. In other contexts, children may care for emotionally unavailable parents, absorbing grief, anger, or anxiety that would overwhelm most adults. While the external circumstances vary, the psychological imprint is strikingly consistent. Early maturity comes at the cost of personal freedom, emotional exploration, and secure attachment. Interestingly, the parentified child often excels in roles requiring responsibility, empathy, and organization. Society may reward these qualities, interpreting them as maturity or talent, while overlooking the hidden sacrifice beneath the surface. The paradox is that the very skills which enable survival in childhood can become burdensome in adulthood, creating challenges in relationships, career, and emotional well-being. Therapists note that parentified individuals frequently struggle with boundaries, learning to say no or to trust others too. Carry their share of responsibility becomes an ongoing challenge. This section frames growing up too fast not as a rare anomaly, but as an archetype embedded in families and cultures worldwide. The parentified child embodies both the resilience and the vulnerability of those forced to navigate adult realities too soon. By understanding the psychological, social, and cultural dimensions of parentification, we gain insight into a hidden population of children whose childhoods were borrowed by necessity, only to leave traces in adulthood that are complex, often invisible, but profoundly real. To understand the child who grows up too fast, we must look beyond the walls of a single home. History is filled with children whose innocence was stolen by necessity, ideology, or circumstance. Long before modern psychology gave us the term parentified child, societies were already shaping children to survive, endure, and contribute in ways adults deemed essential. During the Industrial Revolution in Victorian England, children as young as 6 labored in factories, mines, and workshops. The deafening clatter of machinery replaced playgrounds. Smell of coal and soot substituted for gardens and open fields. These children were praised for their industriousness and resilience. Yet beneath the veneer of productivity lay exhaustion, malnutrition, and injuries that would mark their bodies for life. Families struggling to survive depended on the labor of their children. Society normalized this loss of childhood, framing work as a moral virtue, and in doing so, masked the trauma inflicted upon young minds and bodies. War, too, has repeatedly demanded the premature maturation of children. In the lost generation of World War I, teenagers faced the trenches with a stoicism born of necessity. Their stories were later romanticized in propaganda and literature, often portraying them as brave and self-sacrificing. But the reality was far grimmer. Shell shock, unprocessed grief, and the psychological burden of witnessing death became lifelong companions. Fast forward to modern conflicts in Africa, the Middle East, and Southeast Asia, and the specter of child soldiers emerges. Boys and girls as young as 10 are conscripted to fight, serve as messengers, or act as human shields. They adapt to violence and loss to survive, yet the price is a fractured psyche and the loss of formative years meant for play, learning, and trust. Economic hardship has similarly robbed childhoods across centuries and continents. In the United States during the Great Depression, children took on jobs to help support their families, selling newspapers on street corners, working in laundries, or running errands that kept households afloat. In famine-stricken regions, children were forced to prioritize survival over education, often bearing responsibilities well beyond their age. Across the world, from rural Asia to urban slums in Latin America, economic systems have demanded that children act as secondary adults, absorbing the anxieties of caregivers and the pressures of societal survival. Cultural narratives often shape how societies perceive these prematurely grown children. In some contexts, they are celebrated as symbols of resilience, their strength romanticized in literature, art, and media.
Propaganda has long used the image of the strong child to inspire unity, loyalty, or productivity, whether in wartime posters depicting brave young recruits, or in literature praising industrious children who sacrifice for the family or nation. Yet beneath this celebration lies an undercurrent of trauma, largely unacknowledged. The child who smiles for the camera while carrying the weight of responsibility is also the child who will carry scars invisible to the world. Even within families, culture dictates the normalization of premature maturity. In collectivist societies, older siblings are expected to care for younger ones. In patriarchal households, children are often taught to prioritize family honor over personal development. In times of societal crisis wars, economic collapse, natural disasters, these expectations intensify. The child's personal needs are deemed secondary to survival or duty, and the boundary between care and exploitation blurs. What one culture frames as filial duty, another may recognize as parentification, yet the psychological consequences are often the same: anxiety, hyper-responsibility, and difficulty forming secure attachments later in life. Historical records and literature alike preserve these narratives, providing a stark lens through which to view the costs of growing up too fast. From Charles Dickens' vivid portrayals of child laborers navigating harsh workhouses to modern testimonies from child soldiers in Uganda and Syria, we see a pattern emerge. Societies repeatedly externalize adult burdens onto children, often in the name of necessity, survival, or ideological righteousness. Childhood is not universally protected. It is contingent upon social, economic, and political conditions. This broader context reframes the phenomenon of prematurely grown children as societal rather than individual. Trauma is not merely a private story, it is embedded in economics, politics, and culture. The scars of lost childhoods are as much the product of historical forces as of family circumstances. Recognizing this allows us to shift the conversation from blame to understanding. These children, resilient though they are living legacies of systems that have consistently demanded more from them than any child should bear. As the camera pans across archival images, coal-streaked faces in factories, children marching alongside soldiers, young hands clutching tools or rations, we are reminded that growing up too fast is neither new nor rare. It is a thread woven into the fabric of human civilization, a recurring consequence of how societies organize labor, prioritize survival, and define strength. In acknowledging this history, we begin to see the parentified child not as an anomaly, but as part of a lineage of children whose innocence was borrowed, delayed, or stolen altogether. Section 4. The psychological mechanics. What happens in the brain and soul when a child is forced to grow up too soon? The consequences are not only emotional, they are biological. Developmental psychology and neuroscience converge to explain why early responsibility, trauma, or chronic stress reshapes the architecture of the mind and the soul. The effects are subtle, complex, and often invisible, yet they echo across a lifetime. Jean Piaget, the father of cognitive development, described how children progress through stages of learning, understanding, and reasoning. Childhood, in his framework, is a carefully scaffolded period of exploration and adaptation. When a child is burdened with adult responsibilities, caring for siblings, mediating conflict, or managing household crisis, the natural rhythm of learning is disrupted. The cognitive focus shifts from discovery to survival, from curiosity to problem-solving tasks that require judgment. Emotional regulation and foresight become daily routines, compressing developmental stages into a pressure cooker of responsibility. Erik Erikson's psychosocial theory provides further insight. In the stage of industry versus inferiority, children are meant to cultivate competence and a sense of accomplishment within a safe, supportive environment. Parentified or prematurely burdened children experience a different reality. Their competence is not nurtured, it is demanded. Failure carries not just personal consequence, but the weight of family stability. In these conditions, the formation of identity is skewed. The child's self-worth becomes entwined with the ability to anticipate, prevent, or resolve crises. Their identity is functional rather than intrinsic, defined by utility rather than selfhood. Attachment theory, pioneered by John Bowlby, illuminates another critical aspect. Secure attachment develops when children experience consistent care, responsiveness, and emotional attunement from caregivers. Parentified children, or those facing neglect, often receive inconsistent or conditional care. The resulting attachment style tends toward anxious or avoidant patterns. They learn to anticipate neglect, suppress vulnerability, and monitor their environment for threats. In adulthood, these patterns manifest as difficulty trusting partners, fear of dependence, or compulsive caretaking, a subconscious rehearsal of childhood roles. At the neural level, chronic stress profoundly alters brain development. Cortisol, the body's primary stress hormone, is released in response to danger or high responsibility. In children subjected to repeated stress, cortisol levels remain elevated, affecting areas of the brain critical for emotion regulation, memory, and executive function. The amygdala, the seat of threat detection, becomes hyperactive, primed to respond to perceived danger. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for impulse control and planning, may develop under strain, leaving the child perpetually vigilant yet emotionally fatigued. Hippocampal development can also be compromised, making it harder to integrate experiences into coherent, manageable memories. The result is a child who is biologically wired to survive crisis, but often struggles to relax, trust, or feel safe even in supportive environments. Defense mechanisms emerge as both coping tools and double-edged swords. Hypervigilance, dissociation, perfectionism, and emotional suppression are common strategies. A child who must anticipate parental moods or shield siblings becomes adept at reading cues, modulating behavior, and suppressing needs. These skills serve immediate survival, yet they also entrench patterns that can hinder spontaneity, intimacy, and self-expression later in life. Dissociation, for instance, allows the child to detach from pain in the moment, but can translate into a disconnection from emotions as an adult. Perfectionism may drive achievement, yet it often masks anxiety and skepticism. Paradoxically, these experiences can produce a form of resilience. Studies in developmental trauma show that children exposed to adversity often develop heightened problem-solving ability and adaptability. They may outperform peers in crisis situations, excel in leadership, and demonstrate extraordinary self-discipline. Yet this resilience is hard-won and intertwined with ongoing vulnerability. The skills acquired under duress are contextually adaptive, not necessarily emotionally liberating. Real life examples bring this neuroscience to life. Consider Sarah, who grew up caring for her siblings, while her mother battled depression. By adolescence, Sarah had developed an almost uncanny ability to predict emotional shifts in others, manage household logistics, and suppress her own desires. Psychologically, she presents as competent and reliable, but under the surface, she experiences chronic anxiety, guilt over self-prioritization, and difficulty forming close relationships. Her brain is wired to anticipate crisis. Her identity is inseparable from responsibility. Neuroscientifically, Sarah exemplifies the trade-off: survival skills versus emotional freedom. Therapists often note the subtle echoes of these experiences. Adult children of parentified households frequently describe feeling too responsible or always on edge. They struggle with assertiveness, often over-functioning in relationships and workplaces. Intimacy can feel threatening because vulnerability might awaken patterns learned in childhood. The fear that others' needs supersede their own. Yet, with awareness, these adults can reframe their abilities as strengths, while gradually disentangling their self-worth from performance, caretaking, and hyper-responsibility. Understanding the interplay of brain, identity, and attachment highlights why interventions must be holistic. Cognitive behavioral therapy, attachment-based therapies, and trauma approaches can help rewire neural pathways, rebuild a sense of safety, and restore the balance between competence and emotional authenticity. Recognizing that resilience does not equate to invulnerability is key. The child who survived under pressure did so at a cost, and healing involves acknowledging both the strengths and the scars that coexist. In cinematic terms, one can imagine this section illustrated with close-up visuals. A child's eyes scanning a household, hands deftly completing adult tasks. Neural maps highlighting overactive amygdala and underdeveloped prefrontal cortex intercut with expert commentary. The story becomes both intimate and scientific, showing how stress, responsibility, and adaptation leave indelible marks on both brain and soul. Ultimately, the prematurely burdened child is neither weak nor broken. They are biologically and psychologically attuned to survive extraordinary circumstances. Yet, survival does not erase loss. It leaves a paradoxical imprint. Heightened competence coexisting with emotional fragility, adaptability shadowed by hypervigilance, resilience intertwined with unresolved trauma. This is the child who carries adult burdens in a body that should have been free to play, imagine, and explore. Understanding the mechanics of their experience allows us to see not only the cost of growing up too fast, but also the remarkable complexity of human adaptation. While history is filled with children forced into adult responsibilities by war, poverty, or industrial labor, the modern world presents a subtler yet pervasive form of early maturation. Today, many children are growing up too fast, not because they are working in factories or fighting battles, but because the boundaries between childhood and adulthood have blurred, often by choice, convenience, or cultural expectation. Social media has become a new arena where childhood innocence is compressed into performance. Platforms like TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube encourage children to craft highly curated, adult-facing personas. The child influencer, often only 10 or 12 years old, becomes a public entertainer, marketer, or even brand ambassador. Each video, each like, each comment becomes a metric of worth. Psychologists warn that this constant exposure to external evaluation can create chronic self-monitoring and performance anxiety. Children learn to anticipate adult judgment long before they have developed the emotional tools to process it. Economic pressures also play a silent role. In families struggling to maintain stability, children increasingly contribute to household income through part-time jobs, online work, or entrepreneurial ventures. But even in more affluent households, the pressure to excel academically, socially, or creatively fosters a culture of early responsibility. Extracurricular schedules packed with lessons, competitions, and certifications leave little room for unstructured play. Exploration or failure, the very experiences essential for healthy identity formation. Exposure to adult realities has intensified as well. Through constant access to news feeds, social media, and the internet. Children witness crisis, climate change, political unrest, pandemics, and global violence in an unfiltered scale. Parental oversharing of financial stress, emotional challenges, or relational conflicts further blurs the line between child and adult. A 10-year-old watching a parent argue over bills or reading about war in real time may internalize anxiety that was never meant for their developmental stage. Modern technology has effectively collapsed the distance that once protected children from the full weight of adult life. Cultural fascination with mini-adults further accelerates psychological aging. Talent shows, reality TV, and viral content often celebrate precocious achievement, maturity, or sophistication. Child prodigies, young CEOs, and influencers are portrayed as inspirational. Yet beneath the applause often lie immense pressures and private struggles. Society applauds competence while overlooking the emotional sacrifices, sleep deprivation, performance anxiety, social isolation, and the suppression of curiosity and play. Childhood becomes a rehearsal stage for adult ambition rather than a period of intrinsic growth. Consumerism and digital culture reinforce these patterns. Children are targeted as early as age 5, with marketing that emphasizes sophistication, independence, and consumption. Apps, toys, and games often simulate adult experiences, managing virtual lives, or engaging in adult problem-solving scenarios, while seemingly innocuous. These experiences cultivate an early sense of responsibility and self-evaluation, conditioning children to measure themselves against adult standards before they are cognitively or emotionally prepared. The psychological consequences mirror those seen in historically parentified children. Anxiety, hypervigilance, perfectionism, and difficulty forming healthy attachments emerge in new contexts. A child who curates their online persona learns early that approval is conditional, while a child navigating adult-level responsibilities at home internalizes the belief that their value is contingent on utility. Both experience a compression of developmental time, play, exploration, and emotional experimentation are replaced with vigilance, performance, and strategic thinking. Consider Maya, a 13-year-old YouTuber with a following in the hundreds of thousands. On camera, she presents confidence, charisma, and humor beyond her years. Off camera, she struggles with chronic stress, self-doubt, and the fear of disappointing her audience or family. Her diary reveals thoughts far beyond her age. Calculations of engagement metrics, strategies for content optimization, and internal debates about her value and identity. Maya exemplifies the modern parentified child, though the mechanism is digital rather than domestic. Her resilience is remarkable, but it is hard-won, and her psychological landscape is marked by vigilance, self-monitoring, and early maturation. But modern education systems also reflect this acceleration. Schools emphasize achievement, standardization, and competitiveness, often at the cost of social-emotional development. Children are encouraged to manage schedules, prepare for futures decades ahead, and navigate social hierarchies with strategic awareness. Emotional intelligence and reflective exploration, the hallmarks of a healthy childhood, often take a backseat. In combination with digital culture, these pressures create a perfect storm for early psychological aging. Yet, not all consequences are negative, and understanding modern parentification requires nuance. Children exposed to these pressures often develop remarkable skills: adaptability, strategic thinking, empathy, and a capacity to navigate complex social systems. Society prizes these qualities, and in many ways, these children appear ahead of their time. The paradox is that the same traits, signaling competence and success, also indicate invisible stress and unprocessed emotional labor. Their resilience is adaptive, but the cost compression of a childhood meant for play, discovery, and emotional exploration is real. By examining modern echoes of parentification, we see that growing up too fast is no longer confined to war zones or industrial factories. It is embedded in cultural, technological, and economic ecosystems that celebrate early achievement, reward visibility, and normalize exposure to adult realities. This section underscores the urgency of understanding contemporary childhood not simply as a stage of growth, but as a period under unprecedented pressure. Children today are navigating responsibilities, expectations, and stimuli far beyond their developmental years. And society must confront the consequences of a generation whose psychological maturation is being accelerated, sometimes willingly, sometimes unwittingly. The child who grew up too fast does not simply vanish when adulthood arrives. Rather, their early experiences cast long shadows across the landscape of their life. The burdens once carried in secret responsibilities, anxieties, and suppressed emotions often evolve into patterns, habits, and defenses that shape their adult identity. For some, these shadows manifest as extraordinary capability. For others, they linger as unrelenting pressure, self-doubt, or emotional emptiness. Adults who were parentified or prematurely burdened as children often display a hyper-awareness of the world around them. Their senses are finely attuned to moods, expectations, and potential crises. They are adept at problem-solving, anticipating needs, and carrying responsibilities with quiet efficiency. Colleagues and friends often see them as dependable, disciplined, or mature beyond their years. Yet beneath this exterior, they may feel a constant inattention, a compulsion to do more, to fix, or to prevent. Rest becomes elusive because vigilance has been ingrained from childhood, a reflex that is no longer optional. Intimacy, for many, becomes a complex challenge. Vulnerability, which was often unsafe in their early environment, feels risky even in supportive adult relationships. Asking for help may trigger anxiety or guilt. The act of being cared for can feel unfamiliar, disorienting, or even shameful. Attachment styles shaped by childhood often persist. Anxious adults may overcompensate, seeking approval and reassurance, while avoidant adults may withdraw, fearing dependence or disappointment. Relationships can oscillate between overfunctioning and detachment, creating cycles that mirror the emotional dynamics they navigated as children. Consider the story of Daniel, a 30-year-old engineer who spent his adolescence caring for younger siblings. While managing household crises caused by parental illness, Daniel's career is exemplary. He excels under pressure, thrives in leadership roles, and is celebrated for his reliability. Yet he struggles privately unable to delegate responsibilities, fearing failure and avoiding emotional intimacy with partners. The hyper-independence that enabled his childhood survival now complicates his adult life. Psychologically, Daniel embodies the paradox of the prematurely grown child. Competence entwined with vulnerability, strength shadowed by unprocessed emotional labor. Mental health challenges are common among this population. Depression, anxiety, chronic stress, and self-destructive behaviors can emerge as adults attempt to reconcile the expectations placed on them with their own unmet needs. Chronic emptinesser sense that something vital was lost, never fully reclaimed can pervade daily life. Therapy often reveals that many struggles trace back to the adaptive strategies that allowed them to survive as children. Perfectionism, emotional suppression, hypervigilance, and self-reliance that became both shield and prison. Yet, within this shadow lies remarkable resilience. Adults who grew up too fast often develop empathy and insight beyond their peers. Having experienced hardship firsthand, they can attune deeply to the struggles of others, offering support, guidance, or leadership with authenticity. They are capable of extraordinary perseverance, navigating complex personal, professional, and social challenges with skill born from early adaptation. In many ways, the very mechanisms that complicated their adulthood are also what make them uniquely equipped to respond to adversity. Philosophically, this duality, the gift and curse of a stolen childhood, poses profound questions about identity, value, and human development. What does it mean to survive a childhood that was never meant to be lived? How do we reconcile the strengths cultivated under duress with the wounds that linger? The child who learned to suppress their own needs may emerge as an adult of extraordinary competence, yet that competence is inseparable from the cost paid in lost wonder, unexpressed emotion, and interrupted exploration. Life, for these adults, is a constant negotiation between the shadows of their past and the opportunities of the present. Case studies illustrate this tension vividly. A young lawyer raised in a household where she managed her father's finances from age 11 now excels in high-stakes negotiations, yet experiences pervasive anxiety and difficulty trusting colleagues. A musician who cared for an ailing parent during adolescence channels trauma into creativity and leadership within her ensemble, but struggles with intimacy and self-care. Each example reveals the enduring imprint of early responsibility. Remarkable adaptation coupled with unresolved inner conflict. Society often rewards the visible skills of these adults: reliability, empathy, resilience, while remaining largely blind to their hidden burdens. Their strengths are socially visible, their struggles are private, concealed behind competence and achievement. In a culture that prizes independence and accomplishment, these adults may feel reluctant to ask for support, perpetuating a cycle of self-reliance that began in childhood. Recognition of this hidden dimension is essential, not only for therapeutic intervention, but for societal understanding. To see these adults fully is to acknowledge both their remarkable adaptability and the costs embedded in their success. Ultimately, the story of the prematurely grown child does not end in shadow. Healing, self-awareness, and intentional boundary setting can transform early adaptations into conscious strengths. Adults can learn to navigate relationships with greater trust, to embrace vulnerability without fear, and to reclaim aspects of play, curiosity, and joy that were deferred. Neuroscience and psychology increasingly support interventions that promote emotional regulation, secure attachment, and self-compassion, offering a pathway for integration of past experiences into a life that is both resilient and fulfilling. In cinematic terms, this section could be visualized through interwoven imagery, adults moving through the demands of modern life with composure, juxtaposed with flashbacks to the small hands, vigilant eyes, and quiet diligence of their childhood selves. Voiceovers can narrate their inner conflicts, the tension between competence and longing, responsibility and desire, shadow and strength. These visuals, combined with interviews and case studies, create a nuanced portrait of adults shaped by stolen childhoods. Complex, capable, and indelibly marked by the past, yet still capable of growth and transformation. The adult who grew up too fast is a study in contrasts. Strength paired with vulnerability, empathy shadowed by anxiety, resilience tempered by unprocessed grief. Their journey is not merely about survival. It is about negotiating identity, reclaiming agency, and reconciling the gifts and costs of a childhood that was never fully theirs. To understand them is to recognize the profound ways in which early life experiences shape the soul, and to honor the resilience that emerges from shadows that never truly leave. Childhood has long been a symbol of purity, wonder, and possibility, fragile period in which the world is both mysterious and forgiving. Yet, across cultures and epochs, innocence has been a fleeting state, easily lost to responsibility, knowledge, or trauma. The child who grows up too fast embodies a broader truth. The death of innocence is not merely an individual tragedy, but a recurring motif in the human experience.
Imagine walking into a crowded room. The sound of laughter bounces off the walls, glasses clink, and conversations overlap into a kind of chaotic harmony. On the surface, it looks simple. People smiling, people talking, people connecting. But pause for a moment. Look closer. Notice the subtle shifts, the way someone's smile lingers just a second too long, as if rehearsed. The way another person's eyes dart around the room, searching for approval or perhaps escape. The way someone tells a joke, not because it's funny, but because they fear silence. Suddenly, the room changes. What you thought was natural becomes a performance. Every gesture, every laugh, every carefully chosen word is part of a hidden play. Friedrich Nietzsche once wrote, "Every profound spirit needs a mask." He wasn't speaking metaphorically, he meant it. To exist in society, to interact with others, we all wear masks, disguises for our fears, our desires, our vulnerabilities. They keep us safe, but they also make us strangers to one another. Truth is, human beings are not transparent. And yet, beneath those masks lies everything that truly matters, our wounds, our secret longings. To pierce the social performance, and glimpse the truth of what someone is really feeling, really thinking, really hiding? Or would it frighten you to suddenly realize just how fragile, conflicted, and desperate most people really are? The smiling coworker may be drowning in resentment. The confident speaker may be crippled by insecurity. Nietzsche believed that masks were not accidents of social behavior, they were necessities. Every mask leaves cracks, and through those cracks, the truth seeps out. There are leaks in the performance, clues, signs, to see people not as they want to be seen, but as they truly are. He believed that most truths were unbearable in their raw form, so humans invented lies, illusions, and performances to make life tolerable. But Nietzsche also hinted at something darker, that those who can read behind the masks hold a dangerous kind of knowledge. Each truth is a window into the hidden world of human motives. Some will explain why we lie even when we don't need to. If you're ready, this is where the game begins. There was Friedrich Nietzsche, man often mistaken for just a philosopher, when in reality he was something more unsettling, a psychologist of the soul. He lived much of his life in isolation, with few friends, often wandering the streets alone, a notebook always within reach. He stared at the undercurrents of human behavior long enough to see what most of us try to avoid, that beneath noble ideals, people are often driven by darker, hidden forces. Where others saw morality, Nietzsche saw vanity. Where others saw piety, Nietzsche saw fear. Where others saw justice, Nietzsche saw resentment. He was less interested in lofty abstractions and more obsessed with what actually drives people, the subtle mechanics of pride, envy, ambition, and survival. He became, in a sense, the original profiler, reading through the surface stories people told and exposing the raw instincts underneath. You saw morality as a mask, a socially useful story people tell to disguise their hunger for power, their desire for belonging, or their fear of punishment. What made Nietzsche so dangerous and so brilliant was his refusal to look away. Nietzsche's work was radical, not because it was cynical, but because it was honest. He described humans as layered beings, masks on top of masks. As stories piled on stories, yet underneath it all, he believed, was the raw drive for power, survival, and self-overcoming. He is not giving us comforting wisdom. He is handing us sharp tools that cut away illusions and expose motives. Section 3. Truth number 1 to 6. The masks of human nature. The game of masks begins here. Each truth is not meant to flatter us, but to expose us. Why? Because the easiest person to fool is yourself. Think of the man who insists he is happy in a loveless marriage, or the worker who convinces herself she loves her job while resenting every Monday morning. The lie is not crafted for others, it's crafted for survival. To face reality directly would be too painful. A forced smile, a quick deflection, a laugh that doesn't touch the eyes, these are signals that the person is wrestling with a truth they cannot admit, even to themselves. Truth number 2. Morality is often a mask for power. We like to think morality comes from noble principles. History offers countless examples. When the medieval church preached humility, it wasn't only about virtue, it was a way to keep peasants obedient. When corporations today promote loyalty or family culture, it often disguises a demand for sacrifice and control. Reading people. When someone speaks with excessive moral certainty, condemning others, posturing as righteous, ask yourself, what do they gain from this stance? Or does it sometimes carry hidden motives, desire for recognition, guilt, superiority, or even subtle manipulation? Nietzsche's claim was not that kindness doesn't exist, but that it is rarely untouched by hidden threads of self-interest. True motives often reveal themselves not in the act itself, but in what follows. Think of social media, curated images of happiness, staged moments of intimacy, choreographed lives. Reading people, ask yourself, who are they performing for? Imagine someone who condemns wealth as evil. On the surface it looks like virtue. Reading people. Watch for overzealous critiques. When someone obsesses over the flaws of others, ask, what wound is this hiding? Often resentment reveals more about the speaker's pain than the target's flaws. A person may claim to love peace, but explode in rage at small inconveniences. Another may preach honesty while bending rules when convenient. Nietzsche urged us to study not what people claim, but the tension between what they say and what they do. Reading people. When faced with contradictions, don't dismiss them, magnify them. We weaponize morality. The question is not who wears masks, but which masks and how well. And this is where the skill of reading people begins.